Book friends, welcome back. We are here again for another book review on the Most Bookish channel. Thank you so much for coming back because today we are reviewing Memoirs of a Geisha. Did you find it offensive? Because you should. Memoirs of a Geisha, written in 1997 by Arthur Golden. It has a history of kind of folklore, I guess. A lot of it has been westernized. There's a lot of stuff that the West assumes and that we don't necessarily know. And this was Arthur Golden creating a fictional story that was going to illuminate us on some of these topics that we had always wondered about. How he was able to do that was that he interviewed the most famous geisha of all time. Her name was Minako Iwasaki, and she granted Arthur multiple interviews so that he could get some background and understand some of the things and get questions answered that he had that he was going to use to build his fictional story. That relationship got a little tangled because Miss Iwasaki was in an agreement with Arthur that he would not reveal that she was his source, because no one had ever granted an interview about the life of a geisha before this. And she ended up getting death threats. She ended up being ostracized by the Japanese geisha community. They said that the stuff that was in the book was patently false. She said that the stuff in the book was patently false, and she ends up suing Arthur for misuse of her information. The way that we end up knowing that he had these interviews with her is that he thanks her at the end of the book for her invaluable help. So how exactly he thought it was keeping it secret while thanking her, or what, I don't know what was going on there, but from what I've been able to find, all of that stuff is sealed. She sues him, she sues the publisher, they settle, and then she ends up writing her own book, which is Geisha, A Life, and I got it to read when I reread Memoirs of a Geisha. I read Memoirs of a Geisha a very long time ago, back when it was huge and popular. It is a best-selling novel. I believe they've sold about 4 million copies at this point. But in doing my research on it for my reread now, I found the whole story behind the lawsuit and her telling her true story. The weird thing about the lawsuit, or the thing that I think weird, and again, because there's not a lot of information on it, it's hard to illuminate some of the stuff that seems weird to me, but what I find weird about it is that her argument is basically, you used my story and got it all wrong. And his argument was, it's a novel, it's not true, I just used certain things. And so she's almost mad that he used her story at all, but if you're going to use my story, tell it right. But if he had told her exact story, then she would have had even more of a reason to sue him. So it's weird. Again, she sued him, they settled out of court. He was still able to keep going with the story, even selling the book rights to be made into a movie, which ends up happening in 2005. And we're gonna talk about that later. What I will say is, if you're going to read this story, you should read the story. One, out of respect, but also Geisha, A Life has a lot of information about the geisha world in it. And Minako in particular is a fascinating character who has met Queen Elizabeth. She met Robert Kennedy, she met huge luminaries and was very famous for a very long time. It's an interesting story. I will say though that I ended up having to buy this story in an audiobook because her life story is diverse, but the telling of this story, she does it with Rand Brown or Randy Brown, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but the telling of the story is a little difficult. It's a little slow. It was hard at times. It was a little hard at times. The audiobook, which FYI, I prefer regular books to audiobooks any day of the week. But the audiobook was told by somebody whose voice is very soothing, and it also helps a lot with pronunciation because they're saying the words the right way. I would say read it. I would say get the audiobook. Anyways, so back to the original story. Why was Memoirs of a Geisha a best-selling book? It's the story of Chayo. She is a Japanese girl whose mother passes away. Her mother is much younger than her father. Her father is a very old man, and she has an older sister. When the mother passes away, the father cannot care for the two girls. He's also very ill. The way that it's played is that he might be dying, and he ends up, in essence, I'm not sure if he sold them or gave them away to kind of a broker for geisha houses or for placing young girls, or I'm not really sure what his real title is. He just seems to be a respected figure in her village, and she thinks that he's taking her to help the family or to be nice, and it turns out that he's taking her and her sister to the city to give her to a geisha house, and her sister, who is painted as a little bit promiscuous, more developed, and not as pretty, they give her to a regular prostitution house. So the beginning of the story is Chayo trying to find her way back to her sister. She's in this completely foreign world. She starts to meet these characters. She's sold in a really shady way to somebody just called Mother, who is the head of the geisha house that she's given into. There's a figure called Auntie who tries to help her from the very beginning, who's this old kind of weathered cronish figure, and she tries to help her accept her fate immediately and just move on. Chayo is strong-willed, you know that from the very beginning, and she's not having any of that. She is rebelling and wanting to escape from there and go find her sister and run away somewhere. She goes through some tribulations to that effect, trying to get to that point of escape. Very quickly, she encounters her what's soon to be nemesis, Hatsumomo, who is the star geisha of the house, and who wants Chayo to escape and go away because she does not want her to be competition to her later on. Chayo befriends another young maid because they started out as maids, and they're gonna help take care of the house while they start going to their schooling to become geisha. And the young maid's name is Pumpkin. She's a very sweet character, an innocent character that Hatsumomo uses throughout the story to play against Chayo, who becomes Sayuri at a certain point when she dons her geisha life. At this point, you start to see the traditional arc of this story, where it is heroine, horrible situation, trying to overcome it, gets thwarted left and right. She ends up having a huge accident when she finally finds her sister, and they agree that they're going to run away together, and she isn't able to go. Her sister disappears from the story at that point, but she accepts that this is going to be her life after a chance meeting with a figure that she sees in passing, who is a rich businessman with some geisha, and he is kind to her on the street, and it gives her kind of this idea that this is her life. She starts seeing some signs that this is her life and this is the route she should go, and she comes to accept that even if she does run away, where is she going? Who's gonna take care of her? The start of the story is in the 40s because it's or the late 30s, because it's around the time of World War II. So there's no social service. There's nobody to help take care of them. She has no family left. Even if she had run away, she has fantasies that her sister is happy somewhere, but there's no way that she can ever really know that. Her sister might have ended up just being a prostitute somewhere else. Then the real, I guess, upward arc of her story begins, where she is now trying to fight to get back what she wanted, because Mother, who had planned to invest all of this money in her, no longer wants to, because now she is an unknown character. Is she just going to waste everything? Becoming a geisha, the training, the clothes, the whole process, it's a lot of money to invest. And Chayo, up to this point, has already wasted a bunch of her money, because when she tried to escape the last time, she had a big accident, and there's all of these doctor fees that she had to pay. So Mother's not hearing it. You're a maid, you're gonna be a maid the rest of your life, and even if you're a maid the rest of your life, you still won't be able to pay me off all of the money that you owe me. Somewhere in there a godmother, I guess, figure. It's kind of like a Cinderella story. Again, you're seeing the familiar arc. And this is a part of why I think the story sold so well, because it's just a familiar story and he tells it really well. The godmother figure steps in the guise of someone called Mameha. She's another geisha. She's a very successful geisha. She actually lives on her own. You get told at this point that that is another version of being able to be a geisha, where once you have a dana, which is basically a man who supports you financially, once you have a dana, you can afford to live by yourself outside of a geisha house and support yourself and live however you want. So this is a very successful geisha that Hatsumomo actually hates. And Hatsumomo has tried to force Pumpkin and Chayo into certain circumstances to do little things to harm Mameha. And Mameha comes back as a figure that decides that she's going to take Chayo under her wings. She makes a bet with Mother. She says, I'm going to be successful. She's going to pay you back every single penny that she owes by the time of her official coming out ceremony. And if she does, then I get X percentage of her income. Mother thinks this is impossible. She already owes so much money, but go ahead. Worst case scenario, I still make some money off of this situation anyways. They get together and it's cut to Rocky, right? Again, going back to familiar tropes, the Rocky of working out every day and he's sweating and he's running up the steps and he's doing all the things to get to the point where he can actually get in the ring and fight and have the moment where it looks like he's gonna lose, but he actually wins, right? So it goes through all of that. It's teaching her how to talk. It's teaching her how to walk. It's teaching her how to wear the garments that she's gonna have to wear, because the kimono and all of the obi and the things that go with it, the padding, it ends up being like, I want to say 40 or 60 pounds, somewhere between there. And she's small. And this is a part of real life with geisha. You have to become bodily able to be in this world as if you are an athlete, and you have to do everything just right. That's besides the fact that you need to understand tea ceremony, you have to be able to play an instrument, you have to be able to sing, you have to be able to dance, you have to be the most fascinating, interesting person in the room whenever you are entertaining these primarily male guests that go to the Ochaya, which is the Japanese tea house. So she does the Rocky, she gets in the ring. Hatsumomo tries to put a stop to their progress. She tries to interfere a couple of times to sabotage Chayo, who has now gone through her ceremony of becoming Sayuri. That is going to be her geisha name. And against all odds, they managed to win by the bidding for her miswaj, which in the Arthur Golden version of the story is basically bidding for her virginity. It's a whole ceremony that she goes through where she has made some friendships as an apprentice with some of the men inside of the geisha community, particularly the men that Mameha wanted to introduce her to, that we then kind of find out are people who are more likely to pay for a virginity, who historically have paid large sums for other geishas' virginities. This is kind of a specialty, if you will, of these men. And Mameha gets the men into a bidding war over Sayuri's virginity. Sayuri is young, she's the new geisha, she is considered a mameko, which is an apprentice geisha, and she also, in the Arthur Golden telling, has these beautiful blue eyes. She's different. She's something that people would get into a bidding war for. She ends up breaking a record for the highest bid for a miswaj ever. Now, we're gonna pause for un momento. This particular thing is one of the many things that the geisha community was up in arms about. Mineko was very upset about. It's the whole painting of geisha as prostitutes and the whole system as a form of prostitution. They said, absolutely not. This is not true. He's making it up. Arthur Golden's, that was the biggest argument against his telling of the story of painting geisha and the geisha world as a prostitution ring, in essence. His response was, I have it all on tape. I did interviews with her. I think that the payout to her, because they did, like I said, settle, was more around, he was supposed to have kept her contribution confidential, but that's just my guess. Either way, let's say this is true and this is a part of, or was a part of, the geisha culture, and this is actually what miswaj means. This is not an Asian thing. This is not the first time, and disgustingly enough, probably not the last time, where a male-dominated culture will prize young virginal women. There are long histories of European cultures, Asian cultures, American cultures, all prizing virginity in women. There was a period of time where if you were considered non-virginal or somebody knew you to not be a virgin, that you were spoiled goods and nobody would marry you. There were ceremonies called a bedding ceremony to ensure that a royal or somebody of high rank actually consummated their marriage and that the woman was a virgin. And so there would be people watching you have sex for the first time with your husband. This is a European tradition. You'd be watched while you were having sex, and or at the end of the ceremony, there would be the showing of the sheet, of the bloody sheet. Somebody would have to hold it up. Everybody would have to see it. Oh, good job. This is not a weird Asian geisha thing. This is a weird patriarchal thing. There are even accounts of ensuring that a woman is so virginal. Some West Asian countries remove the clitoris on a young girl, sew her back up to where her labia is sewn up, and a man has to break through that entire barrier to have ensured that she came virginal and pure to the marriage. Sometimes the scarring is so bad, and I'm saying this in the present tense because it still happens. Sometimes the scarring is so bad that the woman has to go to the hospital to have it fixed, because how do you fix that? So that the man can then proceed. So I paused so that we do not sit here in judgment of what is possibly true. Is it embarrassing, or did it feel shameful for that community, for that to possibly be known, for the country to be known as aiding and abetting something like that? Absolutely. Horrific things usually are embarrassing or make you feel self-conscious. Now, does that mean that if the women are willing to participate, that it is necessarily wrong? No. But can you say, are they really willing if the entire system is set up to where this is their only option to take care of themselves? You can also make that argument. Either way, we're not going to be xenophobic. This is not something that is specific to this culture. We've all done it. Still do it. Back to Sayuri. She beat the bet with mother. At that point, Hatsumomo had talked mother into adopting Pumpkin as the daughter of the geisha house. And this is something that both Arthur touches on and also Mineko touches on in her story. I guess if you can say both of them are saying it, it is a real practice, but it is a verified practice. Each geisha house needs someone to inherit the house. This isn't, the actual house itself isn't owned by some group of men. It is owned by a former geisha. And in Arthur's version, he makes it seem as if these young girls come from nowhere, they're throwaway girls, and the head of the geisha houses just choose to make them their adoptive daughters. In Mineko's version, she talks about how geisha have children. Geisha get married, geisha have children. They don't get married while they're in charge of the geisha house, but they have children, and often their actual daughters of their body will inherit the house, because being a geisha is not, in Mineko's version, is not a shameful thing to be. It is actually, if you're not going to go into the marriage market, it is something that high class families choose for their daughters or let their daughters choose for themselves, because you can make a lot of money. And in Mineko's version, there's nothing sexual that goes on that the geisha is not a willing participant in. In Mineko's version, it is a world of art. It is a world of dancers. There is a huge tradition around artistry, and they go to school for dance and for to sing, to learn to sing and play an instrument since they are sometimes 3 years old. And Mineko talks about till the very end of her story how the joy of her life had been the dance. And she really hated how this story became about something else when they're all just artists. And that is the focus, and their patrons, they patronize the arts the same way she makes a comparison that somebody here would patronize an opera singer, or a European person would patronize an opera singer and donate funds to the opera house or to, let's say, the symphony, if that's your thing. So her telling of the story has nothing to do with the sexual side. She says that you are in relation with all of your patrons over years, and sometimes you develop relationships with them, sexual relationships with them, but they're completely consensual, and they are in no way an official part of this structure or organized by, run by, supervised by any part of this official authority that runs the life of a geisha. In Arthur Golden's story, once you have a dana, it's registered with the geisha office, and his contributions to you go through there. They tally all of your income. They send you your portion. It's all very official. Which one is the truth? Again, we're not sure. We'll take back up Arthur's version of the story, where at this point, Pumpkin is supposed to be the one who is the new daughter of the house. Hatsumomo, the villain, is fine with this because she doesn't feel like Pumpkin's ever going to be a threat to her. But with Sayuri now having shown how successful she can be mother, who at the end is a businesswoman till the end, she is about her coins, she says, it's not Pumpkin anymore, it's Sayuri. She's gonna be my daughter. Hatsumomo flips out. There's a whole big scene. Not long after, she's like out in the streets. She's getting drunk. She's being stupid. She tries to set Sayuri up with something ridiculous. Sayuri ends up being the victor in that little byplay, and Hatsumomo leaves the story disgraced to become who knows what in her future. She has been a figure who is unlikable and very petty, and her customers really like her, so who knows where she's going to end up. You want her to kind of end up on the streets with all the bad things that she's done, but in the real world, thinking of a Japanese woman in those years alone on the streets, I don't think anybody wants that for anybody. So the Cinderella-ish story moves on, and we're at the apex where Sayuri is now winning all the matches, right? She's going to the events, she's meeting different people, she is beloved in the community, she is being really successful, she's tired because she's working so much, and she develops a relationship with the chairman, who is revealed as the man on the street who had given her the hope in the past. And you start to get told that she actually has feelings for this man. He is much older, but she has very real feelings for him. But he has a subordinate / partner who actually likes Sayuri. He's a disfigured guy and a bit of a difficult man, but he really cares about Sayuri, and he ends up helping her a lot over the years. So she never feels like she can really pursue the chairman because of this other figure. The other figure's name is Nobu, who is the chairman's partner, and she feels that because of the chairman's love of his partner and the way everything is, that's just a hopeless love that she's going to have for the chairman. She ends up having a dana herself. She ends up having a man who takes care of her. And then heading into World War II, when things get difficult for the geisha, this figure isn't as helpful as he used to be, and it ends up being Nobu that finds her a place to stay actually during the war, when the worst years come, because Gyankobu gets shut down to protect the geisha and the society, and everybody goes where they can. Some people end up starving, but thankfully Sayuri has Nobu to help save her. They are eventually allowed to come back Tsugi on Kobu, and by this point Sayuri has decided that with Nobu having helped her and then really stating his intent that he wants to be her Dana and he wants to spend whatever time, energy on her because he cares for her so deeply, she decides that if she lets this happen, the chairman will never be with her. So she gets desperate. By this point, they're starting to entertain kind of gauche American soldiers, which don't really respect the art form the way that the Japanese businessmen had pre-war, but it's business, so they're doing whatever it is to keep the city running. Pumpkin has now become an adult woman, and she's flourished because she's a bit of the common girls who the soldiers love because she talks openly, says what she wants, and acts however she wants. She's not so concerned with the sort of formal world of geisha life. And Pumpkin and Sayuri are back in the geisha world, and they're entertaining a lot of different people, and Sayuri tries to apologize to Pumpkin for having lost her place as the adoptive daughter, even though obviously Sayuri didn't intentionally do anything against Pumpkin. But Pumpkin kind of feels a little hard around the edges at this point, and she doesn't seem really inclined to be super forgiving, but she doesn't seem to really care about Sayuri in general. She's just not really being her friend anymore. This part of the story ends up kind of getting to an apex where they go out on a trip with Nobu and the chairman and another kind of unsavory character, and Sayuri decides that she's going to be seen in a compromising position with the unsavory character by Nobu in order for him to lose interest in her so then she can pursue the chairman. Pumpkin kind of sets her up at this point and sends the chairman instead, and in the end she feels like she lost them both. It's the horrifying tragedy of the story, and then sometime later the chairman comes to find her and she is ashamed and very repentant, and he ends up telling her this story that basically reveals that it was him all along that orchestrated everything. He told Mame how to go help her. He is the one who encouraged her friendship with Nobu. He is the one who has wanted her to be successful because he has, I guess, kind of loved her since he saw her as a little girl, which is a little strange, but it's in keeping with kind of the themes in the story. In the end, they have a whole relationship together. She runs off with her Prince Charming. She leaves the geisha house. They end up living in New York because where else? And at some point, the chairman passes away after they have shared a very long and happy life together. So reading it today is very different than having read it whenever I read it, however many years ago. There's so much Cinderella-ish European. It's so much of an American lens. You can tell this was written by an American man. This was his first novel. And again, it's a pretty simplistic story. It's not as amazing as you once thought. And some of the way that it's told is a little cringy, but all in all, it's still an enjoyable read. And honestly, if you don't know that it is a novel, you actually think it's a memoir. I remember that happened to me when I read it the first time, and then the second time it happened to me for a second before I remembered that it's not a real memoir, because he starts the beginning of it with kind of like a note from this professor that's saying, I want to thank Sayuri for her story, and he just sets it up in a way that makes you think that it's true, and it's also echoes of the fact that he got this story or parts of the story from an actual geisha. The information that you're given, the kind of removing of the veil and the reality that you get to be exposed to that has been kept in secret for so long, it's all very captivating. And taken in that way, it is a good story. It's just, it feels today from this lens and kind of the societal conversations that we have today, which is a whole other topic of how we kind of develop as a society and things feel offensive that as a society we didn't find offensive however long ago. But from this lens, it just feels a little exploitive, and I'll leave that there. Now, Mineko's story gives you even more information. Like I said, she breaks down everything. She breaks down the actual dance academy and its relationship to the larger no theater and artistic traditions in the country. She breaks down the exact social structure. She breaks down different expectations for women during her time. Now, I will say, her actual lifetime was in the 60s, or kind of where she's talking about is several generations after where Memoirs of a Geisha took place. I'm assuming he chose in the 40s because that was kind of the heyday of this world prior to World War II. But Mineko tells her story from later, and because she tells her story from later, she actually is able to add some interesting stuff about figures that we're familiar with. Like, she has a story about Prince Charles coming to Japan and how he signed her fan thinking that he was being complimentary and that she would now have, you know, his autograph. And this is after she spends, I don't know how many chapters talking about how expensive everything is. Thousands of dollars and years are put into the art that is on her fan, on her clothes, in her hair ornaments. Like, it is such an elaborate world. The geisha support this huge industry of different people, and he signs her fan and she's like, it's trash now. It's trash. She gives it to somebody to throw away. Like, how could you defile this piece of art with your stupid name? And then there's another story about her not necessarily liking Queen Elizabeth. It's just, she was a very popular figure and she was important and she knows a lot. I sincerely hope that Arthur Golden didn't actually distort so much of what she said, because I feel like that would be so disrespectful. But I also want to respect the fact that she's saying this is the version. And if it is, then it is. And that's okay too. Again, like I said, it's just a bit slower, but she stays true to her culture and she really gets into some of the information that she gives about what geisha actually are, that they're performers, that they're not prostitutes, they're performers. At one point she says, there are basically two kinds of gaiko, a tachikata and a chikata. A tachikata is a main performer. She is trained to dance and play an instrument other than the shamisen, such as the flute or hand drum. A chikata is an accompanist who is trained to play the shamisen and sing. Tachikata begin their training early and debut as maiko when they are in their early teens, whereas chikata, who come out as ordinary gaiko, tend to study for a shorter period of time and debut when they are older. She talks about exactly how much you charge for an hour of a geisha's time, hundreds of dollars. She talks about how expensive the tea ceremonies can be. You're obviously dealing with a lot of people with a lot of money. And then she gets into the different hierarchy and the structure and the dedication that these dancers, these artists have in their field. She does not address directly Arthur Golden's book. She makes her argument without referring to that whatsoever. But her two biggest contentions are, one, the entire idea that geisha are glorified prostitutes. And she likens some of the geisha with their dana as being similar to a capped woman with a rich man. It is the same thing. Are you a prostitute? She's basically asking, but she argues against it being a formal system repeatedly. At a certain point, she says that the Meiji government, which was striving to enter the world stage as a modern country, was extremely sensitive to international opinion. In order to pacify the Peruvians, it issued an Emancipation Act that abolished the obligatory terms of service, nenkiboko, under which many of the women worked. In the process, the perception of the role of the oiran, or courtesan, and the geisha, entertainer, became intertwined and confused. It still is. She's saying that she is an entertainer. She is not a courtesan in the tradition of the European sense that is kept formally by any kind of man. Are there geisha who are kept by men? Yes. Most of the geisha are not, again, poor little girls who are stolen from their homes. They are chosen for this path by their family, the same way old families would choose a second or third son to go into the church because there was no real other route for them to inherit the property. They would be married off. If you're not going to be married off, being a geisha is a very respected trade for Japanese women in society. And she goes on to a large extent into her process of being formally legally adopted through the court system by the geisha house, and that it was her choice, that she was given that choice repeatedly by her parents. She had multiple opportunities to say no throughout the years, and her parents adored her. She was very loved, and if she had wanted to stay home, that she could have. She is a part of her parents and her siblings' lives into her older age. Throughout the story, they make different appearances. There is a problematic relationship with some of her older siblings, but again, she wants to very clearly dispel this idea that Japanese people are just stealing little girls and selling them wherever they want to, or that they had at any point in time. She doesn't so much say that, she doesn't say that has never happened. I mean, 100 years before, was it socially acceptable to steal little girls in every country, right? But she's trying to say for her story, she does not substantiate any of those claims that is how their society works. She is the closest, and this story is the closest to what it feels like a true retelling of a society and a culture that the Western world is unfamiliar with, while respecting that world. Arthur Golden's book moves away from that, and you can feel the European tones. Why are her eyes blue? Like, there's just things, right? And then we get to the 2005 movie where, Lord help me, I saw one reviewer liken it to one of Madonna's music videos of the time. Visually, it's gorgeous. It actually won awards for costume and design, I believe. Very pretty, very pretty. The colors, what they did with the shooting. The director was Rob Marshall, who had come off of the movie Chicago, and it was very pretty. We'll leave it there. But it was even more Western than Memoirs of a Geisha. The women had their hair down when they'd get back from their long day, and it would be this long flowing straight hair. And you had just read in the book, in Arthur Golden's book, and then Mineko goes even into more detail about how involved them getting their hair done was, and how it would have to be kept for multiple days because the process took hours, and they had special pillows that they would sleep on that would basically elevate their head, and they had to learn how to not lay back and squash their hairdo. And to help them do that, they would sprinkle rice underneath so that if they fell back, their hair would be full of rice. They'd have to go back and sit there for hours at the salon and go through it all over again. And when you're at the beginning of your career, you do this enough times that you get used to basically sleeping in this very specific way. And then you cut to the movie where they're all like, afterwards, oh, I have to let my hair down. Like this very, again, European feeling, European American Western world feeling thing, right? Because you can't get into cat fights without your hair being everywhere. And then that's the other thing, the level of fighting, the actual like physical fighting, like they're gonna stab each other. That is so disrespectful. It is so very American soap opera type deal. In Arthur Golden's book, Hatsumomo got angry and tried to sabotage Sayuri in certain ways, but she never would have crossed that line with Mother to be openly disrespectful, and you know it. And then when Mineko tells her story, she gets into how formal the whole society is, and the way that you speak to everybody has to be so respectful, and you just can't say and do whatever you want. And so this idea that you would be, ripping each other's hair out and trying to stab each other, it's just so ludicrous and so American. It went to a whole other side. They also, there was some commentary about how they used Chinese stars, and this is a Japanese story, and we see that way more now. I feel like the conversation of not using authentic actors for certain roles, especially when those people are available, and it's kind of, in this particular instance, it's kind of a conversation of how the Western world looks at all Asians as being the same, whereas there is a real difference between Chinese and Japanese, and it is deeply offensive to say that they are the same. I will just say, I don't think I would ever watch the movie again. I did not watch it when it originally came out. I saw it for this review and I don't feel like anything was lost. In general, I do not like the movies that come from books. But this one in particular, I usually don't like the movies that come from books because they don't keep to the story, which you can't, obviously, because you can't have a 14-hour movie. But also, the characters are never themselves, the real them, because the real them lives in the pages. But also, they don't tell somebody else's story the way that the author originally can, even if the author participates in the retelling. Those are usually the better movies, but either way, I don't love it. This one in particular, like I said, it took it even farther out, and especially after Mineko saying and legally saying, like, you're getting it wrong, for you to then even go further that way, I think, again, it's not the most respectful thing to do. So, we've come to the end. I really hope that you enjoyed this review. I really hope you learned something and you enjoyed learning something. I hope that you read at least one of these, if not both. But again, you can very much get the audiobook of this one, because this one, when I say read, I mean read with your ears, probably. And I really appreciate you coming back. And I hope you come back for the next one. I'm going to give Memoirs of a Geisha 2 pandas. That's still a lot of pandas. I was thinking about 2.5, but I just can't bring myself to do it today. Maybe if I had reviewed this 10, 15 years ago, it would have been 2.5, maybe even 3 pandas. But time will change the way that you look at things. It'll change the things that you know. And I have read so many books since this book that have made me a different version of myself. So today it's 2 pandas. And in 5 years, who knows what pandas I would give. Because I'm gonna keep changing and you're gonna keep changing, and I hope through those changes, you still come here. So I'll miss you till next time. Bye, book friends. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe if you're not subscribed. Like this video if you haven't already, because if you haven't, I don't understand why, but like it, okay? Please, thank you. Leave a comment. If you want a review on something, tell me what it is in the box below. Like that, in the box below. There's no box below this camera right now, but there's gonna be once this video is done. And we can keep moving forward together. So, bye again.